So thanks everyone for coming to this panel. Today's topic is on nuclear energy and oceans and rivers. And we have three pretty esteemed nuclear experts with us today who will introduce themselves briefly. But I just wanted to open the panel by talking about why this issue is so important, not only actually from a technical or engineering perspective, but in some ways more important from also a public perception and advocacy perception as well. Because right now we are, as we all know here at COP, we're moving into a warming planet. And one of the things that's going to be happening is in many areas it'll be a drier planet as well. But also the river water temperature and ocean water temperatures will also rise. And nuclear power plants, at least classically, use a lot of circulating water to help cool them down, especially on the condenser side of things. So I want to sort of open this forum up with a very basic question. Nuclear energy is both vital for decarbonization and also vital for many areas, like here in the United Arab Emirates, to actually solve water scarcity itself. Yet many people in their perception of nuclear energy view nuclear energy as a big consumer of water. So I want us to just sort of talk about that sort of dialectic that we're having, both nuclear energy as a solution to water scarcity in a warming planet, but also the perception that nuclear energy itself might suffer from those very same phenomena. So I'm going to start with Simon. If you could just introduce yourself, what your background is, and sort of maybe 3 sentences about this issue, and then we'll go right down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Wakter. I come from Sweden, and my background is in nuclear engineering. I worked for a number of years in safety and licensing, and came into contact with nuclear and water in many ways. I wrote my thesis about nuclear power and desalination. Then I worked on new nuclear power plant siting, and of course then you get into contact with lots of the environmental issues and the cooling options that you have. So yeah, looking forward to the panel.
Fantastic.
Hey everyone, I'm Luca Romano from Italy. I have a master degree in theoretical physics. I actually graduated on a different subject, quantum information theory, but then my interest shifted, and right now I manage nuclear advocacy and education project that I established, which is currently the largest in the world by number of followers. And I try to educate myself and my followers on all the issues concerning nuclear, which include, of course, the impact on the water reservoirs and on the sea, which is particularly important in Italy because we are a country that's surrounded by sea, that still suffered from droughts in the past years, as 2022 especially, and so people are deeply concerned about the potential impact on nuclear on water in general.
Hello, my name is Dinara Ermakova. I was born and raised in Kazakhstan, a landlocked country, and I think there are a lot of questions coming up from public in Kazakhstan when we talk about nuclear development there. It's like where the water's coming from. We only have limited resources. We don't have access to the sea or rivers with such abundance as some of the northern countries. And I think it's an important topic to discuss the new technologies. There are many developments in technological side that can alleviate the problem. My background is in nuclear engineering. I got my PhD at UC Berkeley with a focus on nuclear waste management, public policy minor, and minor in business energy. And also I've been working a lot on community outreach and engagement. So those topics are really near and dear to me when we talk about the just transition, access for clean resources and clean environment. So those are, again, part of ocean and river questions is all about the environment as well.
Oh, wait, I might. Apologies. So, I think one of the really interesting questions as we start expanding nuclear energy is the ability for nuclear energy to be deployed in water-scarce regions, especially landlocked water-scarce regions. I'm from the United States, and our largest nuclear power plant's actually in the middle of a desert, miles and miles away from any body of water, and it uses treated wastewater to actually use its cooling tower, blow down, and evaporation makeup. So Dinara, from Kazakhstan, you're a landlocked country that has historically suffered a lot from water scarcity. I'm wondering what your perspective is, how we're going to deploy nuclear in Kazakhstan, or expand it. Of course, we had, I believe, a sodium breeder reactor, Shevchenko, which did a lot of desalination, BN250 or 350. I would love your perspective on how we're going to deploy nuclear in that exact context.
Well, first of all, geopolitics is really a really important topic for Kazakhstan because we have very good neighbors around us that impact a lot our decisions on who's going to build the reactor, where it's going to be built, how we're going to connect it to the grid, and which areas it will be feeding. So aside from that, most of the concerns from public coming how we're going to use the water because it's going to be near the Balkhash Lake. And taking into account our experience with Caspian Sea, Aral Sea, which is complete mismanagement of our agricultural sector, as well as a bit of a geopolitical movement that didn't really work in the past 20 years when we let some hydro dam to be built, and those completely cut the access to the sea or lake. Aral Sea is a lake and Caspian Sea is a lake, but those developments changed the entire environment of those areas. And as you know, Aral Sea is almost dried out, which was one of the biggest lakes in the world before. And many people believe that this is something that we are going to see with the use of nuclear power. So people don't understand the scale of water used and the new technologies that we can deploy in those areas, especially using air-cooled technologies. The reactors technologies itself also can be cooled by gas, by molten salt, by molten metal. So there are other innovations, but even with the large-scale reactors of Generation 3, we still use the water very responsibly. And as James mentioned, we can use the treated wastewater, which I think is amazing. It's nobody else uses treated water except of Singapore for water replenishment. So I think we need to promote reuse and repurposing, and this way we can gain more public trust if we present those as solutions for long-term use of water.
And following up on her comments, Luca, I'm wondering, given that Italy is surrounded by sea, as you noted, when we're talking about the water use in a nuclear power plant, most of it's not consumed, especially in a sea cycle, or what we call an open cycle plant, where we just take the water into the condenser, put it back out. And given that there's a lot of that you can use seawater for that, and there's a lot of seawater, of course, in the Mediterranean and the surrounding water bodies, how is the public perception of water use in Italy and nuclear energy playing into the overall debate about whether we should redeploy nuclear energy back into Italy?
Well, first of all, people are mostly concerned about the impact on tourism because, yes, Italy is surrounded by water, but most of Italy, coastline is inhabited and is actually touristic spots. So people are concerned that it will possibly impact the tourism sector. Now, it's a misplaced concern, first of all, because the footprint of a nuclear plant it's quite tiny, so you can find like a few square kilometers in the whole coastline of Italy. And secondly, because there are indeed spots which are not inhabited and are actually industrialized. We have Porto Tolle, which is an area in the northeast of Italy, which is there is a coastline that is heavily industrialized, right, and where wastewaters are usually dumped into the sea. Mostly, I have to say that mostly the environmental agency prevent the water to be too polluted. But yeah, you could place a nuclear power plant there very easily. Actually, there is a very big gas-fired power plants, combined cycle, so it uses water. So yes, people are mostly afraid of that, and they're also afraid of the impact on biodiversity. So they're afraid that the nuclear wastewater might contaminate the area or impact wildlife in any way. Now, of course, we know that water coming out from a cooling system of a nuclear power plant are not contaminated, they're not dangerous, but they're slightly warmer. So there is, of course, the waste heat from a nuclear power plant does not affect the Earth as a whole. It's like a tiny fraction of the extra heat that we trap with CO2, but it can have an effect locally. So we must take that into account. But fortunately, we have regulations for that, and in Europe, regulations are pretty severe, are pretty tight. So the impact is minimized, and we have no reason to believe that in Italy, where we place particular concern about our landscape, our environment, because they are so precious to us, I have no concern that if it would be regulated in a way that it does not affect the environment at all. But it's still a concern that people have and needs to be addressed.
Yeah, and Simone, given your background in both in Sweden and in nuclear licensing and safety licensing, one of the things that's so interesting is back in that heat wave back last year in Europe in 2022, there was news article after news article about the impact that the high river water temperatures was having on the inland nuclear power plants, particularly obviously in France. Even though the overall production was only reduced by less than 0.2% of what the expected number of terawatt hours that we're going to generate in France. And what was ironic is, here's a heat wave caused by global warming, here's one of the cleanest grids in the world that's powered by nuclear energy, and yet there was more coverage on that than the much more polluting German grid. How do you see it from a regulatory perspective, how we're going to deal with as river water temperatures maybe are going higher than the circulating water systems were designed for? And how do you see how the public perception can really be changed on that issue?
Yeah, so we had quite a significant debate in the 2018 heat wave in Sweden. And to start with, the cooling of the nuclear power plant is fundamentally an economical optimization problem. The size of the condenser and your cooling solution depends on how much you want to spend. And also is a slight historical heritage from when we designed the plant. Our nuclear power plants were designed without computers, with slide rulers and manual computing. And we implemented a lot of conservatism. So what we did was they set a 27 degree Celsius water temperature limit for this plant, Ringhals on the west coast. And what they did to solve this problem was simply redo the calculations, and they found that they have a lot more margin than expected, because when they were doing manual calculations without the ability to simulate and so on, they just were slightly over conservative. And then when they reran the simulations, they found that they had more margin than expected. So it was actually fine to continue running the plant. Of course, any thermal power plant loses a little bit of efficiency with increasing seawater temperature, like your ultimate heat sink. But this is true for all energy sources. So when you have when the temperature is higher, the density of the air is lower. So in the winter, the wind power actually produces more energy because the air is much denser. And the same goes for solar. When the temperature goes up, you start losing some efficiency in the electronics.
I think there is a public perception here that nuclear energy in particular is uniquely sort of dependent on water resources. But as you just noted, right, any thermal power plant, right, that uses a steam cycle, right, is going to need ultimately a condenser that is going to need to eject that waste heat. You can never use 100% of the heat and convert it into useful work. Yet, what is this public perception that we're dominating that nuclear? Is it because the characteristic symbol that people think in their head of a nuclear power plant is those big hyperbolic cooling towers? Is that it? Or, you mentioned the potential here for using air cooling in addition to other technologies. What role do you think that newer technological solutions are going to have in dealing with both the perception and the challenges that we're having as global warming increases river temperatures in actually addressing these two issues?
That's a good question, and I think this is where nuclear hasn't been very active in terms of communication, also development, because most of the developments happened in 70s and 80s, and we knew how to do things differently, how to use the air cooling, how to use the different cycle and be more efficient in terms of water used for cooling. And in Baraka plant, there is no towers. As we can see, it's pretty efficient, it's pretty small, and doesn't emit water even, I guess, to the atmosphere. But it comes to public perception from lack of communication. So it's like if there is a vacuum in informational zone, it will be filled with other information. It's one thing, and another thing is how much do we talk about ocean acidification? That's one of the biggest problems right now, because it really kills mammals and some other organisms in the water, because it's happening right now. And ocean behaves as what it should be. It is a big carbon emission sink. So it sinks as much as it emits, but at the same time it changes the pH of the water in it, and that impacts much deeper than we can think about nuclear. And I think those two things need to be communicated as well, that we really have to be fighting against CO2 emissions rather than fighting all of the small risks that we struggle to communicate in nuclear. And yet some of the risks are not even risks, but still we have to put them into perspective when we try to communicate about those, and people still feel uncomfortable. So I think this is a very good platform here to hear those concerns and try to build our informational strategy to make sure that public is aware of what are the options, what we can consider as a risk, and what can be completely eliminated from the risk list that we have right now.
Yeah, so I thought maybe we should go through the different cooling solutions, but I wanted to reiterate something that both you and Dinara mentioned, that fundamentally the water use is is kind of a stupid term, because it involves both water withdrawals, like actually you take water and you do something with it, and water consumption, where that water is gone. And there's a very big difference between whether water is consumed or whether it's just used to be recirculated back. So just wanted to reiterate that. Then maybe we can mention that, so there are three basic technologies to cool a nuclear power plant. You can have a natural draft cooling tower. So you have a very tall cooling tower that creates a draft from the heat of the steam rising. Then you can have, well, I guess four actually. Then you can have mechanically ventilated wet cooling towers. Then they will be a lot lower, which we use in a lot of locations. I think Palo Verde uses those.
Yeah.
And yeah, we also have them here in Europe, in France and in Germany. And then you can have dry cooling towers that are just vented, drive vented, so you basically big fans to power them. Of course there's a trade-off with the power to power those fans. And then the fourth one is where you don't have any cooling towers, and actually no nuclear power plant in Sweden has any cooling towers. They're just on the coast, and we recirculate seawater back in. And when we built the first nuclear power plant in Forsmark, north of Stockholm in Sweden, we built this biotest lake to study the effects of nature from the heated cooling water. So this is a man-made lake in the ocean from the rock that we excavated to build the nuclear power plants, so that you could keep the effect of the heated water contained, and then study the effects on fish and on aquatic life in general. And what they found is kind of expected. Plants and animals that like slightly warmer water, they do really well, and plants and animals that don't like warmer water, well, they go somewhere else. So that's kind of what you see. But then you also see a big increase actually in bald eagles there, because there are much more fish outside of the nuclear power plant than anywhere else. So seabirds that depend on eating fish really thrive there. So there's a huge population of bald eagles next to the nuclear power plant.
I wanted to add just something on what she said, because she mentioned rightly the fact that nuclear power plants are not uniquely using water, right? And so because before you asked me about the Italian concerns about where to place the nuclear power plant, I have to mention that we do have several coal plants still active in Italy. Not a lot, they don't make up a huge part of our electricity mix, but we can't get rid of them because they provide a rotational reserve. And all of them are on the coastline. We have one in La Spezia, one in Civitavecchia, which is near Rome, one in the south in Brindisi, one in Sardinia in Sulcis, and one in the northeast in Monfalcone. Now, as I always say, you could just replace them with nuclear power. You would go from the dirtiest to the cleanest energy source, and you already know where to put them, because if the site is fit for a coal power plant, then it's probably is for a nuclear power plant. I mean, you already have the grid, the existing grid. You don't even need new connections. The problem is that those coal power plants are in the middle of cities, and you can't place a nuclear power plant in the middle of a city because regulation says that you shouldn't, except for the fact that nuclear power plants do not emit anything that kills people, while coal plants do. So they are emitting pollutants right in the middle of the city. So this is an interesting example of, I would say, cognitive dissonance of the people who don't realize that there is already an ongoing risk being existing, and they are afraid of what it might actually be with the nuclear power plant. I will also add that eventually, if you really are out of options, there is another way of cooling a nuclear power plant, which is using subterranean water. You can pump so the radiant waters and use that to cool a nuclear power plant. It's more costly than other ways, but you can do it. And finally, the nuclear power does not consume water; it just uses it. But if you build a cooling tower, I want to mention that you don't send a lot more water into the atmosphere, taking it from basins, because when you allow water to turn into steam, to vapor, it absorbs much more heat, right? So by using a cooling tower, you effectively diminish the intake of water by your reservoir, basin, whatever, by 97%. And that's also why, for example, China is building a big nuclear power plant next to the sea, like I think 6 or 10 reactors maybe, and they decided to use a cooling tower even if it's close to the sea, because the inlet from the sea and the outlet would be massive. So by using a massive cooling tower that they are building right now, they would reduce this intake of water by 97%.
Right, but I think this brings up a really important question, which is something that you hit on before, which is the difference between consumptive water utilization and just water utilization, right? When we're talking about those open condenser systems, right, where we don't have a cooling tower, just pumping water, say, from the ocean, like what we have at Baraka or at the Swedish nuclear power plants or many nuclear power plants around the world, right, we're running the water through the condenser and it comes out just a little bit warmer and we dump that back in. As you noted, when we have a cooling tower, however, we actually take a lot less water in from the body of water that the plant is next to, yet we do ultimately consume more. We evaporate more. It leaves the plant and then we have a little bit left that we dump back as blowdown. And yet I think we're in an interesting place right now where historically we have thought about cooling towers as actually an environmental mitigation measure to reduce the so-called thermal pollution that might impact an ecosystem of a circulating, of the river or the ocean. And yet we're now in a place where we're seeing a lot of water scarcity, especially a freshwater scarcity. How do you think that sort of new dynamic where we're sort of no longer constrained maybe by as much by ecological concerns, but instead by maybe water consumption concerns, should we really be looking back at the regulations that were placed in many countries that basically prohibit the use of an open cycle system in a river or in a lake or a freshwater system, given that consumption issue?
Yeah, maybe we should also say first that so the Swedish heating problem, for example, that was a problem of the intake water being too warm for the regulation. Right. It's not really a technical issue, and you can upsize the condenser, etc. The issue with heating that we saw in the French nuclear power plant was a problem with environmental regulatory issue with water that was being emitted back after being heated by the nuclear power plant, because then you would go over the threshold for how much you're allowed to heat the water there. And of course that was also a problem because this is also fresh water in the rivers, and it affects the life in these rivers. And when you're talking about the access to water that we have today, a lot of the water, pretty much all of it that we consume, comes from aquifers. And we consume the water in these aquifers in different ways. We use a lot of it for agriculture, and when we water, most of it evaporates and goes away into the atmosphere, and it takes very long time for these aquifers to replenish. We also use up the water in aquifers in other way by pollutants. So for example, when we do fracking or other activities underground, we can pollute these ecosystems and water resources. And this is a very significant and growing problem, but it is absolutely very solvable because we do know how to desalinate water. Of course, here in UAE, kind of the champion of desalination, we have just a few kilometers away from here one of the biggest desalination plants in the world, if not the biggest. And it's actually quite cheap. There's been a lot of worries about would countries go to war over water resources, but it turns out you could build a desalination plant for, this is a quote from an Israeli general, you could build a desalination plant for the cost of 1 week to go to war. So it doesn't really make sense because it's actually very, very cheap to make water. And I think this is also a solution, of course, where nuclear could contribute greatly, because when you have a lot of cheap and fossil-free energy, then you can use that energy to produce more desalinated water.
Right.
Yeah, I guess to add to that, there are also opportunities for colder countries to use that kind of warmer water for district heating. It's not so popular in the United States, unfortunately, but for countries that has more established system of pipeline and district heating in place, when most of the countries in Soviet bloc we had established district heating, so repurposing that water and replacing the coal plant heating systems with nuclear water was water that coming from nuclear power plant that used to be that needs to be cooled down. We can repurpose it. Ideally, we can heat up the spaces and use energy efficiently. So I think those, again, it's not communicated well, all the opportunities, and I think long term we might see more people struggling with having access to heat as we expand to bigger territories, as we move in other places. And I think those systems need to be also promoted early in advance before we build up houses that don't have access to district heating and have their own heaters. So I think this will be example, like Iceland uses very efficient systems for district heating, and it's very cheap there. Every house has access to heat at a very affordable price. But the system was built right out, like as people started moving in, they built it very efficiently. The geothermal resources were used to the benefit of the population as soon as they started exploring it.
Yeah, thank you, Dinara. This is like one of my favorite topics, so I'm gonna take the opportunity to hijack it a little bit. I spent a lot of time working on nuclear beyond electricity, and of course, there's great opportunities to use the heat, because what you fundamentally produce is heat. Then you choose to make electricity from that heat, but you can do other things as well. And where I live in Stockholm, we did have a kind of one of the OG small modular reactors that was built for like the model suburb that was supposed to have, or it was built, housing, jobs, schools, etc. And this was all heated and powered by this small reactor that produced both the heat and the power for this suburb. And globally, 50% of all the energy we use is heat. And this is responsible for 40% of our total carbon emissions. 50%, half of that heat again, so around 25% of our total energy use is for heating buildings and hot water and for cooking. And this is heat at low temperatures, around 100, 120 degrees, that we can most definitely supply today. And around 70 nuclear power plants globally do also supply heat as well. And I know, for example, in Switzerland, all their nuclear reactors also supply heat for different kinds of district heating purposes, from greenhouses to cardboard factories. So it's doable today.
Yeah. Luca, you have a...
I just have a small thing to add. Like, generally speaking, as we said, we should heat has an effect on the local environment, and we all want to try to minimize that, and for this reason we should try to reuse as much as the heat as possible. So district heating is an option, desalination is an option, because you can do it with thermal processes. You can also do some carbon capture, like direct air CO2 capture with thermal processes. They will be doing it in Sizewell in the UK. Unfortunately, it's still an expensive process, so someone must pay for that. As Sizewell will be a pilot project, and we'll see if it's sustainable. With different reactor types, you can also do higher grade heat that can be sold to chemical or industrial plants, not power plants, for their processes. I know that it was mentioned yesterday that an American company will be building new reactors that will operate at a higher temperature and sell the steam directly to a plant, to a factory, like an industrial factory, for their internal usage. I do believe that, more broadly speaking, we still have a lot of usage of the products of nuclear power that we do not have seen yet. I pretty much think that we are with nuclear power where we were with the fossil fuels in the 1850s. Like, okay, fossil fuels have existed for 80 years by now, and they had trains and maybe like the first steam-powered ships, but they were a long way from exploiting the full potential of fossil fuels. And I do think that we are at the same level with nuclear power right now.
You know, I think it's really, you bring up a really important point, Luca, and I think it's, you know, this discussion is really about, you know, the impact that we have on oceans and rivers. And most of that impact, actually, generally for a nuclear power plant, the largest interface that the plant has with the environment is through that cooling system through the oceans and rivers. But it's important, I think, we distinguish between waste heat or so-called waste heat and process heat or energetic heat. And the basic problem is, from basic physics, you can't ever extract 100% of the work out of a heat source that you're generating. So you have the heat coming out of the reactor. You just can't, by the second law of thermodynamics, get all of that and convert it into useful work. So we have to have some of it left over as waste heat. And I think the question that we have here is things that are traditionally thought of as waste heat, which is what we generally have in that circulating water in the condenser. Is there going to be applications now for, say, district heating, especially with larger, say, industrial heat pumps that we can boost that up from 40 degrees Celsius, maybe up to 100 degrees Celsius with not that much energy input? What are we thinking about, given where we are, the reevaluation of the classical sort of dichotomy between waste and process heat or waste and work heat?
I don't know, Dinara, do you want to?
Yeah.
Otherwise I jump in. Yeah, of course, we can use it, exactly like you say. A nuclear reactor is maybe 3 gigawatt thermal, and we decide to make about 1 gigawatt of that into electricity. Those remaining 2 gigawatts of 10 degrees warmer water than seawater really is very difficult to find a good use for. You could maybe use it to heat some kind of greenhouse a little bit, but it has limited applications. I think they do this at one of the reactors in Switzerland, for example. But
France as well.
what you can do is you can run the steam through a reactor for the high pressure turbine, and then at a number of points extract steam very efficiently to not only get like a 1-to-3 relationship between the electricity and the heat, but for every kilowatt hour that you lose in electricity production, you can get somewhere around 7 to 8 kilowatt hours of heat out if you optimize this process. And this is, of course, a very big potential for nuclear power plants. The kind of issue, of course, is that nuclear power plants produce so much heat that it's difficult to find a good off-taker for them, because you would have, it's only cities with several million people that have that high enough a demand for heating, and even then in the summer it's usually a factor 10 lower.
It would be a start to not prohibit it, because in France, France has a long history of sabotaging its own nuclear power, and so there was a law that is, I'm not entirely sure it is being repealed, it might be still existing, that basically outlawed district heating with nuclear. So I know that most heating in France comes from nuclear to electrification, but not district heating. There is, I think, one nuclear power plant in France that supplies heat to a terrarium, like a big, reptile house that needs to be kept warmer, and that's about all the district heating that is done in a country that has one nuclear reactor per million people.
So, I think one of the, do you want to? One of the things that I think that also we've been touching around here is the application for nuclear power. When we're talking about rivers and oceans, we're not just talking about its use for waste heat, but also the ability of nuclear energy to really make, say, the ocean water into drinkable, potable water, and the impact of nuclear power and its ability to do desalination. And it's really amazing. I was on the very long bus ride back from Baraka, and I was just doing in my head the fact that a single reactor at Baraka, and not even all of its output, could desalinate all the water that's used in the United Arab Emirates in a single reactor, and we obviously have 4 there. Just to give you an idea of the massive amount. In fact, we wouldn't even come close, we would use a lot of it, but we wouldn't use all of the power, of the electrical power that's coming out of that, and that's just through standard reverse osmosis. What role, and I want to start with you, in talking about, historically we've seen very limited applications of nuclear energy for desalination. Kazakhstan and when it was especially under the Soviet Union, occupied by the Soviet Union, had the largest nuclear powered desalination. Where do you think nuclear and desalination goes to? And I'm sure you're going to have something to add to this as well. But I want to start from the Kazakh experience.
No, that's a great experience, I would say, because the whole city actually was built around the power plant. So the plan was, we found oil, we started exploring, we needed to make sure we have supply of water, we needed to make sure that we have also people there. So first came the power plant and desalination project, and then came people. And then that it grew into very, very big region populated by thousands and thousands of people. Unfortunately, we shut down the project, and mainly because of the public perception that didn't really move on with refueling it. And right now, it still stays under commission because it's been a lot of political issues in terms of what to do with the current project. But at the same time, it shows that we can build entire area around those projects because it provides you access to very vital resource, water. And same as I heard the same rhetorics in Egypt, where most of the 90% of population, I think, resides along River Nile, and the rest of the area is completely empty of people. And now adding the option of putting providing water to further regions and maybe using the water from the other side of the country, desalinating it, would provide more opportunities for people to live. So because water access is very important for everything, agriculture, for just like life in general, it's important. And I think for the regions in Middle East that have access to water, that expands the opportunities to spread out the population and explore the agricultural sector more efficiently, because in many countries in Middle East, food is exported, and that comes with food insecurity, because if anything happens, any geopolitical issue, those sectors will struggle a lot. Same with African region, areas that are empty, usually near the ocean, near the deserts and far from the ocean. People near the ocean still struggle with access to clean water, but having desalination plants along the sea line will allow to produce more water for entire country, expand it. And also, not necessarily every country needs a desalination plant, taking into account the massiveness of the project and how much it can desalinate. So countries can build consortium to provide water to each other to develop those regions. So I always like to see when several countries partner on such large scale project to benefit many regions. And I think this will bring a lot of benefit long term for agricultural sector, the food security, water access, population, just access to housing. Because again, if you live in a very densely populated capital, the housing situation will be very expensive. So not many people could benefit from space from benefit of having a big house for the whole family. So that will clearly eliminate some of the problems we have on bigger cities, coastline cities, and cities with no access to the rivers.
Oh, good.
I will add very quickly onto that. I think there is a very good argument for using water desalination, possibly with nuclear power, also in terms of protection of biodiversity. In the sense that we need to expand our food production worldwide, because there are still some billions of people that do not have a healthy diet, nutritionally complete diet, and also the human population is still growing and will keep doing so for some decades at least. So we need to expand our food production, and with water desalination we can do it maybe in deserts or in area with low biodiversity. If we don't do that, eventually agricultors will need to move where the water is and in the soil, and where the water is in the soil, it's normally where a plant already grow, which means we will have to cut forest in order to grow food, and that's of course is not great for biodiversity, right? So there is a very good compelling argument actually for water desalination, also in terms of biodiversity protection, and of course nuclear power, by providing the lowest carbon footprint of all possible energy sources, will also provide the lower carbon footprint for desalination.
Yeah, Of course, desalination for nuclear is not anything new. Every nuclear power plant does desalination to provide the clean water that you have in all of your process systems. And as many of you know, we have nuclear reactors on a lot of naval ships around the world. And these reactors are, of course, 100%, or these ships are, of course, 100% self-contained systems that provide all of the water for, if you're talking about an aircraft carrier, thousands of people. So this is not something new. And there are nuclear reactors like the one you mentioned in Kazakhstan. There are reactors in Japan that provide a little bit of desalination also for external uses. In China, they're now building desalination for one of the reactors. So this is something that exists. We know how to do all existing technology, which nuclear is also kind of supremely suited for. And it is very important that we manage to create more water for countries such like countries in Africa, because we know we have a growing population. We already have a problem with feeding this population, and there was a new report out on agriculture in Africa, and if we don't do something about the efficiency of African agriculture, because it's very low yield for the amount of work you put in,
Right.
we have to expand the footprint of that agriculture. But we can, with existing technology, we can massively improve the efficiency of African agriculture. So this is low-tech solutions, simply irrigation, access to tractors and modern machinery, and also some like modern seeds so that you can grow high-yield crops. And with this technology, we can keep current African agriculture at the level it is today, even as the population increases. And that is extremely important if we want to keep biodiversity loss and climate change in check.
Yeah, I think, one of the amazing things, and we'll get to questions just right now, but is just to end sort of the panel section of this, is that what's so interesting to me, at least, is that in the popular perception, water is one of the downsides of nuclear power. But I think as we've seen, in many ways, actually, the ability of nuclear power to desalinate, to use water resources efficiently or not at all in some cases, and to make literally deserts bloom in some cases, really makes that actually water utilization could be a major advantage of nuclear energy, especially as we go into a hotter, more crowded and drier world. And I saw a question over there, please. Oh, shall we?
I'm from Egypt,
Yes.
which is a developing country. And my question is, the climate change issues and solutions are costly. When we talk about desalination of water, seawater, it's nice to tackle these ideas, but actually in the countries where most of the problems lie, funds and money are very scarce.
Yes.
So I would like to know or discuss what's your point of view, and getting funds for such projects is not easy. It's very challenging. People's awareness are still not within the average even knowledge of the issue. So what's your opinion about these challenges in the developing countries?
I can cover that. No, that's a very valid point, because in many developing countries, that's a big issue of financing. Like, how do we finance it? Because not every country has like 20 bill upfront cost to put in, like UAE had. During the COP, there were a lot of discussions on how to create a fund similar as World Bank, but that will not exclude nuclear projects from being funded by this ventures. And there was already created a international nuclear infrastructure bank that had that in mind. When several countries chip in and can fund each other's project, that goes much easier when you can at least fund part of it, and then maybe developer can part another one, and then private investments could flow as they see market signals that, well, it's been partially funded. It means that there is a great opportunity, and I think this part of it, and then of course the private investments, government support is needed. For example, from local governments, it's important to signal that, hey, we want to have it. In Egypt, you already building one power plant. But it was mainly because the partner was able to provide good financing options, right? And I think this is very important to tackle, that we need multiple options of financing, because again, things happen, geopolitics changes, and having a separate venture that could secure some of the funding to help the project being complete on time is really important. So I agree, it's an important question. We are at the very beginning of solving that problem, but the discussions already started and some ventures being formed. So I'm very hopeful about that.
I will add something which also addresses a different topic that is often brought up. If you go to pretty much any other booth around here, they will explain you how the cost of renewables plummeted in the last 15 years, let's say, and now renewables that used to be expensive are very cheap and very convenient. Now, how did this happen? It's simple. Government poured dollars into the sector. They funded, they incentivized, they subsidized renewables for trillions of dollars, okay, and this allowed the technology to progress, to develop, and so the cost went down, the interest rates were down, because all governments showed that they were very serious about renewables, and so the interest rates were down, because you know that these are going to be built, right? So I think pretty much the same needs to happen with nuclear power. Government need to invest, they need to show the investors that they are serious about nuclear power, that they will not like drop project midway, as it happened like in Italy and in other countries as well. And if it happens, the technology will become cheaper. And this is also addresses the point because which happens, which is asked to me a lot about why should we invest so much in nuclear power when most emissions will be coming from developing countries. And the answer is because we have a moral duty to bring the cost of this technology down, so the developing countries will be able to afford them. And so the West need to invest in nuclear power also to help countries like Egypt adopt this technology, which, by the way, is happening because, as you surely know, Egypt is building a very big nuclear power plant in El Dabaa. Like work started this year, and this plant will also have desalination. Actually will be the biggest desalination plant in the world once it's operational.
One last aspect, even with the cost reductions in renewables that we have seen now, the major barrier to getting renewables deployed in the developing world is financing, because the cost of capital in developing countries is extremely high, and of course we need to find mechanisms to lower that cost of capital.
Yeah, and I just want to add, thank you so much for that question, because I think as you brought up, the Egyptian plant is a perfect example of the moral obligation that I think the richer countries have, who have historically contributed to the very... Oh, sorry. That is historic... Yeah, probably would cause issues. I apologize. I keep on forgetting I had this headset on. Two different, the historical contributors to global warming have been the richer countries. We have an obligation to help finance and fund nuclear power as well as renewable and other clean energy deployment and desalination into developing countries and lower income countries. So thank you for your question. Any other questions do we have for the panel today? All right. I think it's 2 p.m. Should we, do you want to talk a little bit more? Is there anything that we've missed that we want to talk about with water, the potential, the downsides, the upsides, desalination, something else? Hydrogen, maybe?
No, I have a joke that I need to make because I'm sitting on this for an hour now.
Go ahead.
Of course, thank you to our moderator on this water debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you for, of course, to our panel.
I just want to bring up a nice case study that I know of, which is the case of the Turkey Point plant in Florida in the United States. So in 1975, the United States crocodile was almost extinct, was declared endangered by the UN. And until 2 years later, they found a nest of crocodiles in the discharge near the discharge system of the Turkey Point nuclear power plant, because crocodiles. First of all, crocodiles are cold-blooded animals, so they need warmer waters, and also the area of the bay where it was normally very polluted, but in that spot it was not, because the water discharge for a nuclear power plant is totally clean. So when they discovered that, they created a reserve, like they created a system of channels, a sort of an artificial lagoon reservoir where crocodiles are nesting. And in 2007, the US crocodile, the North American crocodile, was removed from the list of endangered species. So this is actually, I think, is a pretty good note on which to close the panel about nuclear power and water.
We'll get a lot more crocodiles, apparently. Not so sure that's a great selling point, but go ahead. Any last closing remarks?
Closing remark is that we also have potential to decarbonize the shipping industry, which has been, I think, one of the overlooked industries, which actually contributes to 13% of global emissions. And some of the shipping, they leak, they do emit, and they pollute a lot. And I think exploring the nuclear reactor technologies for powering the shipment, I don't know, how do you call shipment ship?
Shipping industry?
Shipping industry, yes, that will improve significantly. First, we will cut the lengths of shipment, because we can really power the industry quickly and make them faster in terms of like their speed of moving, and at the same time decarbonize the entire industry. Isn't it amazing? I think this is something that we can do, knowing how far the naval industry went.
We would also cut the number of ships, because like 30% of cargo ships is oil and gas tankers.
Yeah, my poor joke aside, I do have some little closing remarks. Kind of want to return to something Dinara mentioned in the beginning, that everything has an environmental impact, and I mean, this panel is not about diminishing the environmental impact, that you do get some kind of effects from the slight warming of water that you emit. But we also have to accept that. So today I read a new article, it was Swedish research from the Swedish Meteorological and Hydrological Institute, showing that offshore wind farms have an impact on the way water currents mix, because they disturb the flow of the wind, which changes how the water mixes downwind from the wind farm, and it changes the salinity and the nutrients in the water. Of course, this is not a major effect on ecosystems, and when we oppose clean solutions like renewables and nuclear because they are not perfect, then we implicitly accept a system where we have very major effects from the fossil fuel system that we already have today, with fracking or oil tanker accidents. So yeah, let's keep our eyes on the target here.
The famous zero risk bias, but thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for our amazing panelists, and thank you for attending.